That escalated fast. It's only day 4, and already an under-attack Iran has drawn in the entire region. Targets include the U.S. Embassy in Saudi Arabia, oil and gas installations up and down the Gulf. We saw on Sunday France's military base in Abu Dhabi targeted, all part of Iran's strategy to employ cheap homemade drones in part to shut business, spook markets, and scare away tourists as it defends against an existential threat to the regime that saw its leader eliminated in the opening hours of the U.S. and Israeli bombing campaign. That Israel would pound and even occupy parts of Lebanon to counter any response by Tehran proxy Hezbollah was to be expected. But how about this wider escalation? How far will it go? Both Israel and the U.S. warn of heavier bombing still to come. And while the casualty toll mounts, ordinary Iranians asking the same question as panic buyers at French filling stations. How big a spiral? How long will it last? Today in the France 24 debate, we are asking about the escalation with former French ambassador to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, Bertrand Besancenot. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you.
Former French from New York. We also are joined by Iranian-born journalist Sohrab Amhari, the U.S. editor of Unheard, the author of Tyranny, Inc., How Private Power Crushed American Liberty. Welcome back to the show.
Good to see you, Francois.
He's a former U.S. intelligence officer and national security consultant, Michael Pregent. Thanks so much for being with us again.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And France 24's Shirley Sitbon. How are you, Shirley?
Good.
All right. Reminder, you can always listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Let's start with the very latest. In the Shia holy city of Qom, airstrikes destroying the building that houses Iran's Assembly of Experts. This as we await the decision as to who will replace Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in Tehran on Saturday. Now, Sohrab Amhari, the Tasman news agency saying that the building was vacant at the time. Still, what is your reaction to these images that we saw over social media earlier?
Yeah, I mean, the question that raises for me, the images, is whether or not this is an effective way to bring about regime change in Iran. And I have to say that I believe the answer is no. I'm no fan of the Iranian regime. I live in the West. I've voted with my feet because I don't want to live under theocratic rule. However, I also know that it is much more of an entrenched regime than the Trump administration seemed to have imagined, and that it's a systemic regime that is it is not dependent on XYZ set of personalities, however they might be sort of admired religiously among the Islamist crowd in Tehran. So, I question whether or not that it's destructive, and presumably some innocent people might have been hurt. I don't know about this particular incident, but whether or not it's efficacious in terms of achieving the goal that President Trump has set out for himself, which is regime change. Apparently, we're back to like 2003 style rhetoric about freeing another Middle Eastern country. It just won't happen by aerial bombing, and I think it highlights the fact that potentially the U.S. is driven itself into a kind of quagmire situation from which it cannot see an obvious off-ramp.
Michael Pregent, you agree?
I have a different take. I don't disagree with what Sohrab said. I would just say that if these individuals were actually killed, then we're shrinking the pool of candidates, and that allows the Iranian people time and space to be able to do something. The less opportunistic. I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. I hope you guys aren't hearing that.
We're not hearing it. It's fine.
Okay, good. All right, great. So what I believe this allows is for the Iranian people to the time and space to be able to do something, because the individuals that are being targeted are known, right? So there's a severe degradation of capability in this leadership. When we hit Qasem Soleimani in 2020, his replacement was nowhere near Qasem Soleimani's level. Ismail Qani couldn't even speak Arabic. He had no relationships with the Iraqi militias, with Hezbollah, the Houthis, or Hamas. He was focused on Afghanistan. So each time you take away a key player from this regime, you allow the people to decide to go follow somebody else. And I do believe that whoever they follow needs to be somebody that has skin in the game, has been on the ground, and has been part of these protests, or somebody charismatic that's able to mobilize the Iranian population. So there are a lot of key things going on here, but the talent pool is being degraded, and that gives the people of Iran an opportunity to change their government.
An opportunity to change their government. Bertrand Besancenot, your thoughts on this? And again, this striking calm which is the Shia city, the holy city, where they confer to decide who the next supreme leader will be, probably.
No, I think that it is a very sensitive issue. But the aim of the Trump administration is clearly to strike on all what they think are the symbols of the regime. But they are more the symbols of the state than of the regime. But they want to give the feeling in the population that all the authorities of the regime can be hit at any time, anywhere, and that there is no other option than to change the whole regime. So this is the message which is behind. So we can argue to know if it is relevant or no, if it will, at the end of the day, give bad feelings to people who are nationalistic. It is maybe another aspect that is not taking into account.
All right, and the second aspect, and again, the events are moving so fast that it's difficult to keep up with them, was a short while ago at the Oval Office, the US president sitting in the company of the German chancellor, lashing out at the UK, which in the build-up to this campaign refused to allow its Indian Ocean base of Diego Garcia to be used for US military planes. Donald Trump's words even harsher regarding Spain, which has done the same regarding U.S. military installations there.
And now Spain actually said that we can't use their bases, and that's all right. We could use their base if we want. We could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it, but we don't have to. But they were unfriendly, and so I told him we don't want to. Spain has absolutely nothing that we need other than great people. They have great people, but they don't have great leadership. And as you know, they were the only country that in NATO would not agree to go up to 5%. I don't think they would have agreed to go up to anything. They wanted to keep it at 2%, and they don't pay the 2%. So we're going to cut off all trade with Spain. We don't want anything to do with Spain.
We're going to cut off all trade with Spain, Ambassador Besancenot.
Well, we are used to the non-diplomatic language of President Trump, so I'm not really surprised. But it is true that he's going a little bit far there and putting in a difficult situation the German Chancellor, because, of course, Spain is part of the EU, and it gives him the feeling that you are trying to divide the Europeans, which I think is a very bad message.
We saw a kind of a deft PR move, Michael Pregin, on the part of Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, because he was asked to comment on Donald Trump's remarks regarding Spain. And Merz said, yeah, it's true, Spain doesn't pay enough when it comes to its NATO dues. He never answered the question regarding the non-use of those bases. Your thought on Trump's language on whether or not he needs NATO?
He needs NATO, and the NATO secretary was in the United States, and he said some glowing things about what President Trump is doing with this Operation Epic Fury. But I do believe when the president says he's going to find a way to punish Spain economically, that he's going to do that. And the language I heard, the language that stuck out for me was, we'll use the base anyway. What are you really going to do? I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope the EU and NATO can put a little bit of pressure on Spain to say, listen, all we're asking for is a defensive capability, right? Allow us to conduct defensive capabilities, conduct those defensive operations with us. But we'll see what happens. But when the president says something like that, you got to try to get back on his good side in order for good things to happen.
Shirley Sitbon, when the first strikes happened on Saturday, it's definitely two countries involved, U.S. and Israel.
Definitely. And actually, Spain was the only European country that criticized this. The others were very neutral at the beginning. President Macron said he called for de-escalation. He said there was a concern of this spiraling into chaos. But Spain criticized the move from Israel and the U.S. So yes, there were two at the start, and since then it evolved because now, at least on the defensive side, well, we've seen some change. I mean, first of all, with declarations, when Iran attacked countries in the Gulf region, when it attacked Saudi Arabia, the Saudis reacted saying that this was unjustifiable since it has said that no attack against Iran would leave from its soil. And then the Saudis said that it was possible that they would retaliate. They'd have that right to retaliate. And then other countries were attacked and had the same reaction. And then the Europeans said, well, they will definitely not take part in attacks, but will have defensive action. And defensive action also means that their bases will be used to strike at various ballistic missiles to destroy those stockpiles.
There's what's happening in front of the cameras and what's happening behind the scenes, Shirley. On Sunday, the Washington Post reported that the Saudi Crown Prince made multiple private phone calls to Trump over the past months, advocating a U.S. attack. The Post quotes 4 sources. I don't know what their sources are, and did so in private. Does that seem plausible?
I don't know if it's plausible. Iran is attacking those countries perhaps because it wants all those countries, including Saudi Arabia, to ask Donald Trump to stop what's happening, to stop the attacks against Iran. But it seems counterproductive for now.
Anyway, the Saudi government has denied that this was true. And from what we know, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, as well as Turkey, have tried for quite a while to avoid a confrontation in the Gulf for their own reason, because their main priority is clearly to develop their economy, and they don't want to have a conflict in the area. Now, the things have changed when the Iranians have started bombing the different Gulf countries. So the message by Mohammed bin Salman was a very clear one, to say that he would retaliate, possibly retaliate. And it is clear that the Gulf states are considering that it is a kind of treason, I don't know.
Treason.
Treason. Because they have tried really to avoid the war. And now to have these Iranian strikes on their soil. In the beginning, they were expecting to have some of this bombing, but only on the US bases. And in fact, it is not the case. It means clearly for the Saudis as for the other Gulf states that in Tehran now the government want really to put the chaos in the whole region with the objective, which seems very clear, to show that they have a real capacity of nuisance. And they, starting with the Strait of Hormuz, but also all the other aspects, and showing that if they want to use the fact that President Trump is not very popular on this war in his own country, having in mind what happened at some time in Vietnam, I think that their aim is clearly that one, to use the time going on in bataille d'usure, as we say.
A war of attrition.
Yes, exactly. To hoping that at some point there will be a pressure on the American government to stop the war. So this is at least what they have in mind, apparently.
Sohrab Amhari, is it working? Price of oil has climbed again today. It was at $70 a barrel 2 weeks ago. Now it's at 83. This drawing in the whole region, is it working?
We'll see. I mean, the President Trump began by saying that this would be I mean, this is the whole premise of all of the advocates of those wars, that it would be very quick. Apparently, Vice President J.D. Vance advised the president to go big, but go quick, go fast, according to the New York Times reporting yesterday. But now it seems like the timeline keeps getting extended. We heard 4 weeks as a possibility, and then today the president posted something on Truth Social saying we can wage, quote, a war forever, and we have infinite ammunition, or say nearly unlimited ammunition, which is simply not true. I mean, I've interviewed the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense Elbridge Colby on these issues before he was tapped into this role, and he said part of the reason we should pivot away from the Middle East and focus on China is because we live in a world of scarce resources. So you have to wonder what American strategists who are aware of the limitations in terms of interceptors. Lockheed Martin, the defense company, can only produce a few dozen THAAD interceptor systems per year. And they're being fired pretty heavily now in response to the Iranian missile attacks. So that's one issue, is the kind of sense of military resources beginning to be drained in ways that may endanger U.S. national security elsewhere. You mentioned the oil prices. Of course, Americans, a lot of us drive, and we're very sensitive to the price of gas. The stock market today took just an absolute beating. All the major indices are deep, deep in the red. And then you have the unpopularity, which is the fact that the Reuters Ipsos poll found that only about 1 in 4 Americans supports this operation. The whole premise of the Trump movement, I went through that phase as a younger person of being in favor of regime change, but then we lived through like the 20 years after 9/11 of these wars that achieved nothing and got us bogged down in a region that ultimately isn't all that strategically important to today's United States. And President Trump, part of the reason he took over the Republican Party was on the premise that he thought the Iraq war had been a disaster. He wasn't going to wage wars for moral reasons, for freedom, things like that, but for a more narrowly defined and strictly realistic account of American foreign policy. So this is all for voters. It's like, wait a second. We voted for what a Trump-Vance ticket that called itself, quote, the peace ticket. And when they came into office, likewise, they called themselves the peace administration. This is all very, very jarring for voters. And you're not really seeing a rally around the U.S. flag effect. Today, we're only 2-3 days in. Imagine what this will be like a few months in, even just a few weeks in, for the Republican Party that was already not very enthusiastic about what would happen in the midterm elections.
All right, so 2 parts to what you've just said. One was on the capabilities, the means, and the ability for a longer conflict, and the second, the reasons for it. Michael Pregent, first off, since we spoke a week ago in the build-up, has your view, or have you seen public opinion evolve in the United States on all of this?
Well, yeah, the one thing that President Trump said is that I've seen the polls. The polls are accurate. The American people aren't for this, but this is the right thing to do. And it's because of the Iraq war. It's because of Afghanistan. Because I was in Afghanistan and Iraq. I was in Iraq for 5 years, and Iran fueled the insurgency there. Shia militias, Al-Qaeda. That war lasted forever because we empowered Iran's Shia political parties, and they built a proxy force to attack Americans. They did the same thing in Afghanistan. They armed the Taliban, they armed the Haqqani network, they armed Al-Qaeda. So if you want to end forever wars, you got to take away the regime's ability to fund those forever wars. And that's what this is what's happening now. The president can survive low opinion polls for this conflict as long as he meets those goals. Degrade the nuclear program, degrade its ballistic missile program and its drone capabilities, and limit or end its support for terrorist proxies. Israel has degraded Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. The Iraqi militias are now being targeted. So these things are happening. These are successful things, but I don't think we're going to see 100,000 Americans deployed to Iran, boots on the ground. And the targets, when we talk about running out of munitions, the targets on the ground, the static ones, have been hit already. Now we're on targets of opportunities. But we have to stop spending a $2 million missile, using a $2 million missile to take out a $50,000 drone that Iran has, hundreds I mean, tens of thousands of them, the Shahed drones. Those are the ones that are attacking oil and gas facilities. Those are the ones that are attacking the embassies. We don't have air defense systems set up to take out these drones. That has to be done by close-in weapon systems on the ground and aircraft. So that's where Iran has its strength. And Iran is doing exactly what I would do as the enemy. Attack American Sunni regional allies, attack infrastructure, affect the price of gas and oil in order for them to put pressure on the United States. But instead, I'm seeing a coalescing right now. There is a window. This can continue to be successful if the president sticks to those goals: nuclear program, ballistic missiles, drone capability, and giving the people in Iran the time and space to take back their government.
And we're seeing live images there from Beirut, where you can see that smoke billowing in one part. Israel, which has been locking horns again this Tuesday with Iranian proxy Hezbollah. There's the start of the ground campaign in Lebanon, attacks by those pro-Tehran proxies in Lebanon, as we say. In Iraq, where authorities say they've stopped a drone that was aiming at the U.S. consulate in Erbil. And then there's the Gulf. Iranian drones striking the U.S. embassy in Saudi Arabia this Tuesday, hitting it directly after previously hitting the mission in Kuwait. Tehran's also employed conventional missiles. But its use of drones, as Michael was saying, sets it apart from its adversaries. James Vazina has more.
This building in Bahrain, attacked by a drone. The same drone strike was filmed by a resident just a few floors below. With a distinctive sound coming from its motor and a triangular shape, Shahed 136 drones are easily recognizable. Over the last 48 hours, they've been launched at many targets across the Gulf region. Iran first started using them in 2021. The drones weigh 200 kilograms and carry a warhead in their nose. With a reach of up to 2,500 kilometers, they fly at low altitudes and are more difficult to intercept than ballistic missiles.
Shahed drones aren't adapted to our interception systems. Our systems are incredibly complex. They're able to reach high altitudes in a short amount of time. The problem is, we've almost stopped using the more basic systems needed to stop these drones.
And that's why they're so efficient. Estimated to cost several tens of thousands of euros apiece, the drones are also much cheaper to build compared to missiles, which can cost millions. The Shahed 136 is used in other conflicts around the world. Iran has sold its kamikaze drones to Russia for its war in Ukraine.
Thread on X, formerly Twitter, by academic Kelly Grieco, that wondered if the United Arab Emirates could keep up its 92% interception rate. The Economist journalist Greg Carlstrom described the, quote, terrible asymmetric economics of a missile defense. Using Ferraris to intercept e-bikes gets expensive fast, Shirley Sitbon.
Yes, it does. But thinking about what you said about the fact that there's a will to change the regime, I think this is just the ideal scenario, perhaps, for Donald Trump. But what he said earlier, that he was asked by a journalist, what would be the worst case scenario? And he said having someone who will be the successor of Ali Khamenei, who will be just as bad as him. So the idea is...
Be worse even, he said.
Or worse even. But you start with saying just as bad, worse even. But the idea is to destroy as much as possible and to weaken as much as possible Iran's capabilities, its ballistic missiles, its nuclear program, the fact, even its image and its link to the various proxies it has. But then after the US and Israel end their operations, they'll believe that the population could do something. Whether it does something or not, Donald Trump, well, he says he would do the job. He would say that he had done the job, even if in the end it's chaos. The ideal solution would be ending this, and then he'll say, I gave an opportunity, a historic opportunity to the people of Iran, and now they have to seize it. If they don't, well, it's not my fault. And the Israelis and the Americans believe, I think, that the 12-day war over the summer was what brought a bit later the mass historic protests, and they hope to shake everything again so that new protests would arrive and then maybe topple what's left of the regime.
But
or the regime can stay there, but with someone else. He said earlier, we had some ideas, but the people we had in mind have been killed in the strikes.
But again, when we look at the drone warfare, and by the way, Ambassador Besancenot, Ukraine's president offering to help both Dubai and Qatar with drone technology in response. If this is a long war, and if they're using those cheap Shahed drones we saw in that report,
no, I think it is a political move. As Iran is an ally to Moscow, of course, it is very understandable that he suggests or proposed to do so.
Right, but on the question of if it is a long war, can those cheap drones help Tehran to weather the storm, to outlast the more expensive intercept?
No, but it is quite clear, and this has been said, that the drone capabilities of Iran are maybe the most dangerous assets that they have militarily wise. Because, of course, they are not very expensive. They have thousands of them. And this can hit very sensitive facilities, in particular in the Gulf. If they are striking, for example, a plant or a desalination plant, it will be terrible for the Gulf countries, because we know that, for example, Riyadh takes its water from the Gulf. And of course, if you have no water, no electricity in the capital, this is a very strong... But we are not there, fortunately. But it is very clear that this is the main danger for the Gulf countries. It is the drone capabilities of...
And Michael Pregin, on that score, again, these drones that some of them, we spoke with one expert who says some of them require launch pads that can be taken out. Others don't even need them.
Right. So here's the target of opportunity for the U.S. Air Force and the Israeli Air Force. These rail systems, that when the most effective use of the Shah drone is the swarm launch. So you would have multiple launchers, multiple trucks. They can launch 5 Shah drones at a time, and they can swarm. The limitations is that that's exactly what we're looking for, the movement, and it takes about an hour to get them set up. Now, those individual launches that you're talking about, that could be 10 to 15 to 20 minutes, right? And those are harder to track because you can hide those things. They're not very big, but they're very effective. When we talk about what Zelensky was saying, the Ukrainians have developed a tactic to take out these drones. Again, these drones are at a 30 to 40% failure rate, just malfunctions, just crashing on their own. But 70 to 80% of them are being taken out in the Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that last 20% aren't effective. So they've developed a technique, and it's as simple as a 14.5 millimeter machine gun in the back of a truck that listens for a lawnmower flying in their direction, because that's exactly what they sound like. They fly slow, they sound like a lawnmower, and they're able to take them out with these 14.5 millimeter technical vehicles. So I think he's serious when he says we can help, because they have mastered the technique of taking out drones.
And again, if the war lasts, they talked first a few days, and they talked about 4 weeks, then they said maybe more.
Right.
Time is on Iran's side?
Well, here's the thing. These drones have to be programmed before they're fired, right? So we already have predetermined targets. The gas fields, the oil fields, those plants, oil and gas plants are in the area. Those are static targets. What we're seeing is low-level IRGC drone launchers basically saying the enemy's that way. And that's why you're getting these civilian targets hit, because they haven't had the benefit of command and control, of being able to use radars, being able to communicate with these teams. So they're firing indiscriminately in some cases. But the static targets, that's the long game. But that's exactly what we're looking for, is those multiple launchers being set up to go after those static targets.
Sohrab Amhari, when is time called on this? Is it down to how much ammo and interceptors the U.S. and its allies have, or is it about the price of oil?
Probably all of the above, but what I've heard most often speaking to, including administration insiders on background, is that it is a question of this: which of the two, how much Iran has in terms of ballistic missiles, the shorter range and medium range rockets and missiles, and of course drones, versus interceptor munitions. Essentially, how many interceptors the U.S., the Israelis, and others can field, and before that runs out. I think that's the main kind of mathematical equation, somewhat similar to the Russian-Ukraine war being in an old-fashioned World War II style artillery war. In this case, it's more about interceptors and Iranian missile and drone capabilities. But I think, some of these kind of very granular discussions, technical discussions, can lead us to lose sight of the big questions here, which are the ones I think I raised, and I say them not as primarily as an Iranian American or an American of Iranian heritage, but strictly as an American. As an Iranian, if the regime change were to happen in the way that the war's proponents and architects envision, then in some ways it's good for me. In some theoretical sense, I can visit the old country and so on, God knows what kind of shape. But it's as an American that I think the footage that I see just seems like a waste, a kind of bizarre time capsule back to 2003, where we're talking about putting a country back in the hands of its own people through aerial bombing. The idea of promoting regime change by air alone is kind of the entire weight of military history is really against that, with no troops on the ground or actors on the ground that would carry that out. And when it comes to questions of war and peace, when the lives of American troops are on the line, we've already had unfortunately who've died in action. The question has to be, is this the most sensible way to stop this threat? If there's any other means to deal with this, and is this, even if the threat is grave, is it the most important threat facing the United States? And we've been told, and it became a bipartisan consensus, that America's future challenges and opportunities lie in East Asia. In a few years, the Pacific region will account for more than half of global GDP. For a United States that's the world's largest net energy exporter, the Middle East just simply doesn't matter anymore. The region that I left behind as a young man, with all its messes and sectarian issues, is just not important to a country like the United States. So to be drawn back into a war, prosecuted in terms of this 2003 George Bush style rhetoric, like I said, it's jarring for a lot of Americans, and for good reason.
If it is about 2003 or 1979, since Saturday, there have been questions over whether it's Israel that forced the U.S.'s hand, the way it appears to have done during last June's campaign against Iran's nuclear installations. Now, late on Monday, we saw the U.S. Secretary of State after speaking behind closed doors to Congress, effectively admitting to reporters that it was Israel's initiative to launch the operation that started 4 days ago.
If we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Now, we heard, Shirley, a variation on that from Donald Trump later, because there's never one single story, and that was they, the Iranians, were getting ready to attack Israel.
Absolutely.
Who do you believe, Donald Trump or Marco Rubio here?
Well, I believe that Donald Trump would not say with his own words to everyone in the world that he was forced to do anything. Because the question was, were you forced by the Israelis, pushed by the Israelis to have these strikes against Iran? And he definitely would have not said, yes, I was forced to do it, so I did what I was told and forced to do. But no, he said, and he tried to explain why he talked about an imminent threat, saying that the Iranians were the one dragging these talks, planning an attack, because there were, in the past few weeks, and especially in the past few days, many people saying that the Americans and the Israelis knew about these meetings on that day, and they dragged along these talks and were not genuine in their efforts to find a deal through negotiations. They dragged it. They made everyone believe that the talks would resume in a few days. Donald Trump even had a few words hours earlier saying that he wasn't really pleased with the way talks were being handled, but everything will resume in a few days. So yes, everyone was saying that this was just a ploy, a way of the US and Israel to take Iran by surprise. And indeed, the Iranians were not expecting this on that day. But Donald Trump said that it was the other way around, that the Iranians were planning a surprise attack, and that the U.S. and Israel could not let them go through with it.
All right, that's Donald Trump's word. Bertrand Besancenot.
No, the imminent threat is not very convincing, to be very clear.
And who's running the show? Is it Israel or is it the United States?
No, what is true is that President Trump was certainly unhappy about the result, the outcome of the negotiation, because as usual, the Iranians were dragging their feet, as they always do. But I think that the opportunity offered by the intelligence service, that it was a unique opportunity to kill the main leaders of Iran. I think this was the real, in terms of timing, the objective is something different, but the timing is certainly covered by that. Now, the problem is to see, we know what are the so-called four strategic aims of the US administration. But the reality at the end of the day, and they are true certainly, but at the end of the day, it is President Trump that will decide if he feels that he has got a better deal, if I may say, than the JCPOA. And I think that he is the only one to decide when and if there will be a stop of the war. And he will present it, of course, as a result which is much better than the JCPOA. So I think that the answer, when they say how long will it last, it will be up to President Trump to decide when he can decide that he can present it as, but he's betting, of course, on the fact that you might have a reaction of the Iranian population. But of course, it is a bet. Nobody knows if this will happen. So he will decide for other reasons.
Michael President, did Marco Rubio let the cat out of the bag when he said that Israel was about to attack and we knew there'd be retaliation against us, so we joined in?
I listened to two people in the administration during this campaign. General Kane, who laid out the actual start of the operations at the Pentagon, and Marco Rubio. I think if you compare both of them talking about the timeline, they're in conflict. And I would go to General Kane. I think Marco Rubio made a little bit of a mistake there when he was talking about it. Because if you look at the military campaign, it was coordinated with Israel to conduct 3 simultaneous strikes at the onset of Operation Epic Fury at 9:30 a.m. local Tehran time, when the regime had let down its guard because they believed they had survived another attack window at night. And in the morning, their countermeasures weren't as effective. That's when the decision was made to go. And it was a joint decision. I think Marco Rubio may have tried to put a story together to justify that he actually gave Congress notice, or the Gang of 8. But if you listen to this man right here that you have on the screen, he laid it out. And this was a coordinated joint attack that happened at the same exact time. And the leadership was taken out first. the Supreme Leader, and 2 other sites where IRGC Quds Force commanders and IRGC commanders were meeting were taken out simultaneously. And that was CIA, Mossad, having a plan, and the target packet was already in place, and the strike group was ready. And that took place in seconds.
Right now, there are no direct negotiations taking place. Just a quick word, because we're going to cut at the top of the hour to the French president who's addressing the nation on the war in Iran here on France 24. Sohrab Amhari, what's the next step?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I can connect it to our previous topic, which was Secretary Rubio's remarks. Look, if the war were politically viable or popular, then you wouldn't have, I think, a quote from Secretary Rubio, who's a very astute politician, very good at what he does, which seems to sort of cast the blame on Jerusalem for this. And again, I think ultimately this is an administration that's responsive to not just kind of the military facts on the ground, but extremely sensitive to polling, more so than the president perhaps is willing to admit, extremely sensitive to the price Americans have to pay at the pump, extremely sensitive to what Wall Street does. So I see a kind of muddled exit. President Trump will claim victory, but the Iranians will as well. And theirs, I think, would have more of a weight to it, their claim to victory, because at the end of the day, I'm fairly confident that in a few months, what we call the Islamic Republic of Iran will still be largely in place, that you will not have like a flag change, you're not going to have a monarchic restoration or anything like that. And for the regime that is obsessed with self-perpetuation, that's a really big win. That's the only win that matters.
All right, and we'll have to leave it there, but we will definitely have you back to discuss whether or not that prediction comes true. I want to thank you, Sohrab Amhari, for being with us from New York. I want to thank Michael Pregent in Washington, Bertrand Besancenot, Shirley Sitbon. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.